right. So welcome to part 4 of 4 of this anger management series. So before we get started, this presentation you're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. So you are welcome, obviously, to review it and to show other people the YouTube video, but to use it to teach it is really what we're saying. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature and not appropriate for children, so we ask for parental discretion. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on YouTube. I have figured out how now to put them on YouTube, so now they are going to be available for viewing. So though active participation is encouraged, you can simply follow along using the chat function if you prefer. All right, so today we're going to be talking about managing anger through forgiveness. And also we're going to talk about maintaining the new you. So lapse, relapse, what are some of the things you need to make sure are in place so that you don't go back to having as many angry moments as you had before. So today we're going to talk about the review from last week. We're going to do a quick review. We're going to talk about forgiveness and letting go. Then we're going to talk about lapse and relapse and how to prevent relapse. And then we're going to talk about resilience and self-care, because that's going to be the most essential part in maintaining a more calm demeanor. Managing stress is going to be a huge part of reducing anger, right? We talked about having that cup of water, putting it down maybe a few more times than you have before. All right, so review of avoidance and escape strategies. If you want to put in the chat, have any of you used an avoidance or escape strategy, or do you remember what those are? Can you throw some in the chat? What did we talk about last week about avoidance and escape strategies? Did any of you use a time delay or another way of, oh my goodness, everybody's coming in late today. Okay. So can be employed to reduce the tension created in dealing with anger generating situations. So we talked about, using these occasionally. These are things that we use really just as not as a permanent solution, right? They're just really meant for preventing further damage to a relationship, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. We just want to make sure that sometimes if we're not in a good place, sometimes when we're tired, sometimes when we are overwhelmed, we just don't have the patience to step back and have a coping thought, or to think about, taking a deep breath before responding. So sometimes just, learning to be absent or taking some time to avoid or escape, finding different ways of communicating, whether that be if someone is talking to you personally, maybe say, I'm just going to ask my wife. That's what my husband says, regardless of what it is. He just has to pass it by me so he has time to think about it. And I'm okay with that. So what are some of those avoidance and escape strategies? We talked about planned avoidance, avoidance by time delays, avoidance by seeking another method of responding. So we talked about planned avoidance. I gave you the example of sometimes when my mother-in-law comes to visit, I plan to teach a workshop or a class when she's there. So that's planned. Or when we talk about let's say we don't like a coworker, for example, or the family function I told you about last time, where one of my students didn't want to see this particular family member, just decided to avoid the family function altogether this time because she was just more tired than usual and wasn't herself. So she planned to avoid that particular anger generating situation. Okay, so that was some of the examples. The other ones we talked about: a planned escape, a distraction, or a timeout. So the planned escape was a classic example. If you're on a blind date, and someone calls you 37 minutes into the date, right? You have planned escape strategy in case it's going terribly wrong. The distraction is really just to reduce the emotional tension that's happening. So sometimes if someone's feeling upset or overwhelmed, or sometimes we're lost our senses, we can either do a loud noise, or I told you about my friend yelling out hippopotamus, and it kind of startles the tension, and so the tension reduces, and we're able to take a moment to think about what's happening, or to let the blood come back to our brain so that we're able to respond in a reasonable manner, or we take a time out. We are not communicating, we're yelling at each other, we're not listening, nothing's changing. So what do? We call a timeout. What happens? The conversation stops immediately. You take a timeout, you tell the other person where you're going to be and for how long. Because when you're away, the point is to think about solutions, or to think about how we're going to solve this issue, or maybe even just talking yourself down. You're not ruminating during this time. You're not thinking about comebacks or revenge. You're thinking about, how am I going to relax? Maybe you're going for a walk. Maybe you're taking a bath. But you always plan a time back in, because this isn't working, because you're both not empathizing, right? Because you're at the crisis point of the anger mountain. You're not thinking, there's no blood left in your brain for reasoning. This is why these are really meant for reducing the tension. These are meant for minimizing damage to a relationship, so that you can take time away to come back to solve the problem. Good? All right, now the desk script. Has anybody used the desk script in the last week? And do you remember what it is and how to use it? Did anybody try it? And how did that go? So we remember the desk script is 4 very important things. The first thing, describe the behavior or the situation. And remember, it's non-judgmental. It's the situation. So it's the dishes left on the counter. It's the socks left on the ground. It's the way the phone is hung up after a conversation. It's not, you are messy and you don't do this and you never do this, right? Remember, we talked about using I statements. So the expression of your feelings or thoughts about what happened. I feel disappointed when, I feel disrespected when, or when this happens, I feel disrespected. Remember, we said we can describe the behavior and express our feelings interchangeably. But using an I statement is really about how you feel about the situation, how you see the situation. And what was the most important part about this desk script is to specify what you need in that situation. So I feel hurt when the phone is hung up without a proper goodbye. I need to feel closure after a conversation. I need a thank you, or an I love you, or a goodbye before we end our conversation, for a positive consequence, so that I can feel settled in our conversation, or so I know that we can leave on good terms. Are you willing to do that? Remember the one where I feel exhausted at the end of the week because I get up with the kids every morning. What I need is one day of the weekend to sleep in, so that I can also feel rested and have a great morning. Are you willing to help me with that? I use it with my husband and my daughter. The conversation to have gone much better. Great. It's sometimes a little bit nerve-wracking to do, but when you keep it short and simple and you talk just about the situation, no one feels offended or defensive, and they understand that some things just aren't their priority. So they don't understand that some things can really upset you right? It's just a dish on a counter for them, but it's not for you. Or it's just the way that it's always been. You've always gotten up with the kids, so why should I do that? Okay, well, right? It's really important when it's something that's repetitive. All right, so excellent. Okay, so brand new session. Today we're going to talk about forgiveness. So what do you know about forgiveness? What is forgiveness to you? Okay, throw something in the chat. Tell me what forgiveness is to you. What does it mean to you? What have you used as forgiveness? What does it come from? How do we use forgiveness? Is it something that is a good thing or a bad thing? Understanding that mistakes do happen and that we're all imperfectly perfect. I love that. Imperfectly perfect, and therefore we have to forgive. We are not perfect people, right? We have to forgive others. We have to forgive ourselves. Okay, good. So what does forgiveness mean? Does it mean does it mean that what they did was okay? Does it mean that it's that you need to be their friend again? What does forgiveness mean to you? Was it something that your parents made you do? Say you're sorry, even though you're not sorry. They deserved what they got, right? Okay, are you feeling quiet today? I know it's the last session. So forgiveness for some people is very different than other people. We all learned about forgiveness in different ways, and we all feel differently about forgiveness. Some people won't forgive because it's very difficult to do, or because they feel like if I forgive, it means that it's okay. Forgiveness means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So let's talk about what that might be. So let's talk about 5 different myths about forgiveness. So, what forgiveness is not. Oh. So, forgiveness is the same thing as forgetting, right? We know that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It doesn't means that forgiveness does not mean that the action was okay, right? Absolutely. But it does mean that mistake was made and someone is trying to make amends. Okay, excellent. So we know that we can't always forget. Some things aren't. Some things you can't forget. But forgiving does not mean forgetting. Okay. And forgiving does also not mean excusing. Forgiving does not mean that what someone else did was okay. That's very important. Remembering that, again, like you've been saying, people make mistakes, and some people make big mistakes and some people make smaller mistakes, but that mistake is still a mistake. So it doesn't mean that what they did was okay. So forgiving, when we think about, if I forgive that person, it means that I'm okay with what they did, is a myth. Okay, that's not what forgiving is. Or forgiving is the same as reconciling. So for some, if I forgive that person, that means that I need to either become their friend again or like them again, or we need to, be friends again, or whatever. Forgiving is not the same as reconciling. You never have to see or care for that person ever again. Is this sort of conflicting with some of the things that you believe of forgiveness so far? Because sometimes we think that if I forgive, it means that it's okay what I did, or that means that maybe if I forgive them, I have to be their friend again. Also, some believe that forgiveness makes you weak. It shows that you're the weaker link of the two, okay? Forgiving actually makes you stronger. And I'll tell you why later, okay? This is sometimes, though, is that we believe that if I say that I'm sorry, that I'm the weaker person, or if I forgive someone else, that I'm the weaker person. So remembering that it takes a lot of courage to forgive or to ask for forgiveness. And the last one, forgiving depends on the other person acknowledging the wrongful behavior. So some people will only forgive when they've been asked for forgiveness, right? In my youth, that is what I thought forgiveness was, but with experience, I have learned the truth about forgiveness, right? And it's true. Depending on, how we were brought up, the culture, our values, maybe even our religion, our parents, our friends, our teachers, we learned a lot of different things about forgiveness. And what was very interesting is going through, I would say, almost 12 years of workshops and hearing how other people view forgiveness or how forgiveness has held them back. There was one person in my class in particular, two, but one in particular. And for her, forgiveness was someone else asking for forgiveness. The problem is that the person that she wanted to ask for her forgiveness had passed away. And so she will never, and had decided that she will never forgive that person. But she'll never get peace from that because that person can no longer ask for forgiveness. That person is gone. So she was holding on to that anger for a very long time, and will always, if she doesn't choose to change her view on forgiveness based on having someone else say, please forgive me, because that won't happen, right? So I also told you about this gentleman who was in my class, probably, late 50s, early 60s, who'd been holding on to a lot of things. And I told you one time he forgave or let go of the rumination or the anger that he held against someone who was in his grade 5 class. And because he wasn't able to give that person repercussions. So when we talk about forgiveness, we have to remember that it's not forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing that what you did was okay. It doesn't mean I have to be your friend ever again. It doesn't make you weak or me weak, because it takes a lot of courage, time, and effort sometimes to forgive someone of a wrongful doing. And you may never get an I'm sorry from someone. Often, very often, the other person doesn't know that they've affected you in a certain way. One person in my class had come, and it had been 5 years that she's been holding on to something against some of her friends, and they don't even understand why she's upset with them. Yet she's holding on to so much anger that she now has physical issues. She has she used to love having people over, now she's not. So there's a lot of damage that was created because of this holding on to something that will never get an I'm sorry. So I hope that we can wrap our head around this, even though this is something that sometimes we've held on to a long time. Let's talk about what forgiveness is. So forgiveness, even if you look at the picture, it's a non-verbal concept. Forgiveness doesn't need to be verbal. You don't have to hear I'm sorry. It's an emotional experience. This is an internal, personal experience. This is something that you have to choose to do. So it's a process. It's a choice. It's an internal state. It involves a process of dissolving feelings of anger, resentment, and or hatred towards an individual. So we hold on to things that have hurt us in the past. And sometimes if we don't take care of it or dissolve it or let it go, it can fester and it can grow into a lot of other things. And this becomes this huge sort of ball, or we can call it a ball and chain that's attached to you. So when we talk about forgiveness, it's about taking that ball of anger and of hatred that we bring into all of our experiences, and we try to either minimize it or put it to one side and said, I'm going to have to let that go because it's no longer serving me. So basically the dictionary is to cease resenting and wanting to punish an offense, flaw, or mistake, right? That someone else has caused you. So constantly ruminating about how we're going to make that person pay, how we're going to punish that other person. Because this is what my gentleman that was in his early 60s had been doing his whole life, just almost like accumulating things that has happened to him that he was never able to let go. Walking into the room, you could feel it. And when he let go of that one thing that the guy did to him in grade 5, you could see a change in his body language. It was amazing. But that whole time, ruminating about how he would punish him if he saw him again. So we have to remember that holding on to things that have hurt us is often the cause of the other reasons we get angry or the other reasons we get upset, because we've been there before, because we feel like this is a pattern, because we feel like we're being attacked. When we talked about peeling that onion back in the first class, when we talked about why we get angry, it's a perceived threat based on our experiences, based on our culture, on our values, on our beliefs. Remember when we believe certain things. So this is really where forgiveness has to come in to dissolve that, the core of the onion. So let's talk about what forgiveness is. Okay, forgiveness involves one person, and that's you. You don't have to tell someone that you've forgiven them, because maybe you no longer speak to that person. Maybe that person has passed. Maybe that person lives with you, right? But it's only about you. When I told you from the beginning that this workshop is just about you, it's so that you no longer suffer the consequences, so you don't hurt your physical, emotional, physiological body holding on to this anger. Okay? Forgiveness is an act an act of will to enter into the process of change. It's a choice. It's a choice, and it's a difficult choice, and something that honestly feels incredible when you let go of something that you've been holding on to. Resentment is a terrible emotion, and it holds you back, and you can feel it regularly. Forgiveness is peace of mind. So it's a letting go of, and it's a genuine letting go of. And when you decide to do it based on things that have happened, that have caused you a lot of distress, caused you a lot of pain, it's an incredible feeling. And it's almost like you can't look back anymore. It's that finally moving forward from this day on. And it's a genuine release of pressure, of ill will, of emotions that hold you back, right? The emotions that you hold in your cup all the time that you never let go of. That's what these emotions are. That's what forgiveness is for. It's for pouring out some of that water. So forgiveness means we will be less emotionally reactive in relation to someone who has hurt us. They no longer have power over you. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Labyrinth with David Bowie, but At the very end, she says, you have no power over me. And it's almost like his whole world crumbles. It's kind of like that. They no longer hold that power on you. You have the power. When we look at that personal power grid, that mastery quadrant, you have control over the choice of letting something go. And that's really where this sits. It can be difficult and it can take time. And what's interesting is that sometimes we don't want to let it go because it's part of who we are. You know, it's part of our self-talk, right? I'm never going to let that go because, you know, then I'm not going to be this, you know, tough, or I'm not going to be able to be as snarky or as sarcastic with this person. And it can take time. It can take, you know, 15 years sometimes, or it can take 60 years, right? We've seen it. And it's not easy. It's really a choice, and it's an important choice. And it doesn't have to be everything. It just has to be those, you know, maybe bigger blocks, maybe the smaller blocks. I feel like this gentleman who is 65, that grade 5 guy was a small block. It was just a small block of his huge onion, but it already made a difference. He says, I feel so much better. I can tell you from personal experience, letting something go that had caused you a lot of distress can physically make a difference in your experience. How are you feeling about that so far? Is it altering maybe your view of forgiveness? Is it something that, yeah, great, good. Because it's not something we think about. It's not something that we, you know, it's part of our everyday life. We never, or we seldom stop and think about what's causing me all of this pain. Why am I feeling grumpy today? What am I holding on to that's no longer serving me? And I think that that's a really important question. What am I holding on to that's no longer serving me, right? Why am I holding on to resentment? Maybe this person, like we said, we can't control them. We can't control things that they do. It doesn't mean that they're okay. It doesn't mean that it didn't make your life more difficult, but it is holding you back. And why would you do that to yourself? So it's a difficult decision, but it's one of the best ones you can make. So forgiveness is not something we do for other people. It's something we do for ourselves to move on. And it's true. This is all about you. This is all about you feeling better. This is all about you not getting angry as often, right? And I repeat that a lot because oftentimes we forget that we're the ones we have to live with, right? So it's important. What's the opposite of forgiveness? What does resentment mean to you? Anybody ever had any resentment? It's a grudge, okay? Hatred. Yeah. Resentment is one of those emotions that is almost like a dangerous emotion because it's an underlying emotion. Anger, at least you're able to have a crisis point and usually let it out. But resentment is something that stays and it can fester, right? So resentment, it's the opposite of forgiveness, right? It's holding on to, it's ruminating about the things that you have gone through or things that you're going to do to make sure that that person pays for your discomfort or your pain. Anger and ill will in view of real or imagined wrong. And what's interesting is, remember again, when we talk about perception, very interesting when we think that the other person may not know that they've caused you pain. My friend who held on to this pain that her friend did 5 years ago, the friend thought that she was doing her friend a favor. So she doesn't understand the anger or why they're no longer friends, because she thought she did a good thing. Right? And with the mom, she did the best that she could. She didn't know necessarily things about how to, you know, raise kids. Maybe she didn't maybe have a mom that was great or whatever. Unfortunately, these are things that we can't change or we can't do anything about, right? So it's a real wrong to us, or an imagined wrong because for us it was wrong, but for the other person maybe it wasn't. So what happens when we hold on to grudges? It brings bitterness and anger into relationships and new experiences. Right? Sometimes think about, if you've ever been cheated on, do you bring that thought or bring that experience into every relationship that you're in, and start off with not trusting, right? Not having confidence in, in this person. It takes away enjoyment of the present. So we maybe bring it with us. Maybe it's almost like a weight on our shoulders. So we might not be able to enjoy life without this boulder sitting on our shoulders. It could take enjoyment from, the present moment, the experience that you're having, maybe with your kids, your partner, your friends, right? It can take away. It can increase depression, anxiety, or increase health issues. Lose valuable and enriching connections with others, and it can prevent progression. Okay, so grudges and resentment are big things, and not often something that we think about. How can I make that smaller? How can I make that easier? How can I change? How can I change the course of this thought? Or how can I remove this ball and chain off of my ankle that I've been carrying around for 50 years or 20 years or 15 years, right? So how can I move on so that the rest of my experiences will be enriching and happy? So if I were to ask you, what are some benefits of forgiving? Why do you think that it's important? What are some benefits of forgiveness? What do you think some benefits would be? It decreases stress. Yeah. Yeah. Altered relationships, feeling of moving past something, better communication, right? Amazing. Peace. I love that, right? So these are all things that we're going to be getting from forgiveness. So healthier relationships, right? Whether that be our current relationships, whether that be our new relationships. Greater psychological well-being, right? When we remove some of the water from that cup, it's no longer as heavy, it's no longer as overwhelming, it's no longer as difficult. It really helps us live a little bit better. Less stress and hostility, right? We mentioned that already. Lower blood pressure. So it's really, when we talk about blood pressure, it's really that constant state of fight or flight. It's constantly feeling like you have to escape, run, or fight, because it's, even though it's a memory or a thought, it can still cause that fight or flight response in our bodies. And living in that state of high cortisol, chronic stress, can create a lot of physiological issues. So it can reduce symptoms of depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. Okay, and low risk of alcohol and substance abuse. A lot of the times when we think of people who have substance abuse, whether that's drugs or alcohol, it's really because they want to mask a feeling, or mask or hide or numb a memory, a feeling, a negative feeling, obviously, so that it can really reduce the need to do that, the need to mask and to hide a feeling. So life becomes easier when you learn to accept an apology you never got. I feel like there's a crisis happening in my family right now. Okay. Eating also, yes. Our eating our relationship with eating. Is that what you're trying to say? Sometimes we have this terrible negative relationship with eating. Yes. Okay. That actually, when we talk about weight loss, it always starts with a psychological thought. Our relationship with food, our relationship with our bodies. Yes, or sometimes there's emotional eating, right? For some of us, we use it as a comfort. All right, so how do we forgive? This is really important, right? We can say, oh yeah, it's a process, just, give it a try. But it's a process, right? It's not just something that happens like this. It's something that will take a little bit of time. So the process of forgiving others, and this is very specific because we're also going to talk about the process of forgiving ourselves. Number one, you have to decide or declare to yourself your intention to forgive. So you stop seeking revenge, retaliation, and stop allowing bitterness and anger to take over. You have to decide that I no longer, excuse me, I no longer want to feel this way. I no longer want to constantly feel resentful of the person that I live with, for example. I don't want to constantly resent how I was brought up. I don't want to constantly choose to put blame on something else for how I'm feeling. So I have to decide, because you are the one who's living with it. So you are the one that's going to have to put the effort into changing it. Recognize your hurt and anger. Allow yourself to feel this hurt and to acknowledge that a wrong was committed. Again, remembering that just because you're going to forgive and let go of it, it doesn't mean that it didn't hurt you, and that it was not okay, right? Remembering that when we forgive, it doesn't mean that we are making what happened okay. We are just deciding that we're no longer going to carry it. It's happened, it's in the past. We have to move on. And three, acknowledge how the situation has affected your life, health, and well-being, right? And that's the reason that we want to let it go. That's the reason that we no longer want to deal with this. This is the reason that maybe we've been upset or frustrated or angry all the time. We know, we've acknowledged this is the situation that's causing me distress. This is why I need to find a way to let it go. So choose to end or renew the relationship, right? For some, this is okay, I'm forgiving you and I'm going to move on. I'm going to choose to be okay with what happened and we can continue being friends. Or I can just choose to be like, you know what? I no longer want you in my life and that's okay. You can choose to do that too. So basically what happens, that letting go. Forgiveness also means that we change old patterns of beliefs and actions that are driven by our bitterness. So when we talk about patterns, 97% of what we do is a pattern. And we have gotten ourselves into a rhythm of doing a certain thing at a certain time, and maybe due to what happened to us, maybe we no longer, I know that some people won't drive on the highway anymore because they were in an accident, but sometimes you can't get anywhere if you don't go on that. So maybe that old pattern of beliefs, maybe the belief is that I'm not worthy enough to have someone love me. That could be an old pattern of belief that's not true, right? So a lot of our patterns have been created due to our past or due to the experiences that we've had. So as we let go of grudges, we'll no longer define our lives by how we've been hurt, and we may even find compassion and understanding, knowing that the other person may not have known any better. The other person may have, grown up in different culture, different belief system, maybe didn't grow up with the caring family, maybe grew up with different experiences. And so sometimes we have to understand that the other person just is not who you are and wouldn't have done the same things that you would have done. But letting go is a genuine letting go. This, when we talk about that quadrant of giving up, a lot of people feel like letting go is the same thing as giving up. And it's not. It's genuinely saying that this isn't uh, this isn't good for me. This pattern is self-destructive maybe, or this pattern is ruining a relationship that I'm in. How can you use this when dealing with a hurt like child abuse, which you had no control over? And that's one of the hardest things to do because it's ingrained. And this is not something that I'm saying is easy to let go of. It's not. It's trying to find ways that the thought, knowing that we can't change what happened, how can I make it better for me? How can I change it so that I no longer have to go back to it? And when we there's this is not something that's easy to do, and I'm not saying that it's something that we just decide on a whim. But when we look at some of the things that are harder like this, right? It creates patterns in our lives, and we need to make sure that we're no longer letting that person affect how we can be, affect our happiness. The person that created this anger or this situation wasn't mentally well. They knew what they were doing, but it was that their mental health wasn't in the right place. It's just like the women who, one of the women had the son who drove the airplane into the tower in New York, and one of the women lost a son, and they were able to communicate and forgive each other or whatever. It's one of the hardest things to do. Forgiveness is not easy, and I'm not making light of it. It's that it's not serving you. And is there anything that you can do to change a pattern that was created by that, right? It's one of those things that takes a lot of time, right? And sometimes it might not ever be different, but you can try to alleviate some of the pain. And sometimes we have to learn to forgive ourselves, right? We are also people that make mistakes. We're also people that may have caused pain to other people. And this is really where it's also a process, right? We also sometimes have to decide or declare to forgive ourselves. I know sometimes as a parent, we don't always feel proud of how we've reacted or responded or some of the things that we've done. And definitely knowing that when we have difficult situations or difficult children, difficult lives, difficult people around us, we're not always our best, right? Sometimes if we're tired, we might say things or do things to our close people, maybe even our coworkers, people we typically feel close to. So I know that for a few years ago, my daughter had a very severe concussion, and it affected her mental health a lot. And because she trusted me, right, she was very hard on me. And so I wasn't always very kind and responsive when she lashed out. So every time I walked my dog in the afternoon, I would be in the forest and I would forgive myself for having not been the best parent and having to forgive myself and say, you know what, I didn't do great today, but tomorrow I'm going to try to do it this way. And I chose to forgive myself because if I kept beating myself up over some of the things that I said or did, it would never end, right? You're not perfect. You do the best that you can with what you have. Acknowledge that your actions and or words hurt the other person and or hurt yourself. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for hurting our own selves, right? We, like you said, with our relationship with food, maybe we're hurting ourselves that way. Maybe we're hurting ourselves with addictions, or maybe we're hurting ourselves with going into relationships that aren't working for us. So how can we acknowledge our actions and say, you know what, I have to stop this pattern, and I can make mistakes. You're allowed to make mistakes. You have to make mistakes. You're human, right? This is what's really, really important. Being a parent is one of those difficult jobs. We need to remember that as long as we are truly trying our best and are always trying to do better, we are doing our best, and we are wonderful parents. You know, that's so true. It is the hardest job, being a parent. And every child is different. When you think you figured it out how to do it with one, then your other child is completely different and doesn't respond the same way, or has learning challenges, or has ADHD, has mental health issues, has gotten into the wrong crowd, whatever. Being a parent is difficult. So if I always say, if they've survived today, you're doing okay, right? You water them, they should be fine, right? I had a friend who said, I didn't have children because I would forget to water them and I wouldn't know what to do. So it is something that we're not going to be perfect at, and that's okay, right? That's what makes us who we are, basically. 3, choose to consciously let go of our guilt. As parents, sometimes we hold on to guilt. Oh, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done this years ago. I should have known that. And what do we say when we should? When we should on people, right? We shouldn't should on ourselves either, right? Maybe we should have, but this is where we forgive ourselves and go, okay, well, as of today, maybe that's what I'll start doing. But you have to choose consciously to let go of guilt. It's choose consciously to let go of guilt of doing self-care. Choose consciously letting go of guilt of taking some time for yourself, because you have to be at your best to be able to move on. You have to be the best person for yourself. And remind yourself that you've made a choice to forgive yourself when the feelings of guilt or regret resurface. Right? When you could have done or should have been doing, or that's not helpful. How can I take this as a lesson and then know that I've chosen to let go of that guilt? You know what, maybe up until now, I didn't spend as much time as I could have. Okay, well, that changes today. I'm going to move on from that. So forgiveness is a very big concept. It's a big, huge, I guess, boulder, onion, we're going to call it, right? So it's a choice. We can choose to do it or not. We can choose to maybe even let go of little things so that the big things aren't as big, right? So that's basically the part about forgiveness. I hope that some of that was helpful. And we're going to sort of take that and think about what we're going to do next when we talk about going back to old patterns, right? When we've let go, or when we've forgiven, when we've maybe moved on or chosen different coping mechanisms, so we no longer go back to our, being angry as often. And those are called lapses and relapses. So what are some situations that lead to lapses and relapses of our old behavior or old patterns, or our anger generating situations? What do you think some things are? Dementia? Okay, yeah. When we're having senior moments and we forget certain things, yeah, definitely. So when we talk about going back to our old patterns, sometimes it just could be because of life stressors. When we're kind of at a standstill, and then we have a move, or maybe our pet is sick, or maybe we get a new pet, right? A puppy, or maybe when we have a baby, or maybe sometimes children can affect if they're sick or if they have issues, it can definitely increase our life stressors. Maybe our job, maybe bad weather, maybe debt, maybe traffic, clutter, a pandemic. Right? Some of these things are bigger or smaller than others, but some of these things can definitely affect our stress levels and can affect our, I'm going to say, maybe reasoning or our discomfort, how long we've been holding that or how many rocks we have in it. Sometimes things like life changes, our eating habits, our sleeping patterns. Maybe we stopped doing hobbies, or maybe we're starting a new medication. Or maybe during a holiday, we've had interruption of our treatment sessions. Maybe there's an emergency. Maybe there's a pandemic, right? There's a lot of things that can sort of increase our stress levels that will go back to old patterns. So what is a lapse? When we talk about a lapse, about going back to our old patterns, it's a short-term or single event, right? Maybe something that you used to say or do that was part of your anger pattern, your anger mountain, our behavior part of the anger mountain, remembering that that's a pattern, that's a behavior, it's something we have control over. So it could be a thought, a belief, a thinking error. Remember when we talked about thinking errors, oh, he must be ignoring me, or he must not care about me. He, has no idea what I need. It could just be he didn't hear me. So it could be a sensation or emotion that is part of your anger cycle and relapse pattern. So catching yourself in that lapse so that we don't relapse, because a relapse just means that we do that lapse several times. A longer term, multiple events go back to old patterns of behavior. So oftentimes we talk about smokers, a lapse would be having a drag of a cigarette, but a relapse would be going back to smoking a pack a day after having been quit for a long time. So these are not failures. They can be valuable learning experiences. So asking yourself, why did I go back to that lapse? Why did I do that? That was something that I haven't done in years or months. Why did I go back to that? What's happening right now? What's changed in my life? Maybe I didn't sleep well. Maybe I'm hangry. So we talk about the relapse prevention checklist. So some of the things that we should maybe be putting in place or asking ourselves, if we go back to old patterns, what have I been doing or not doing? So what are my early warning signs? Remember, we talked about the mental health continuum. Am I starting to be more forgetful? Am I starting to feel more pain or tension? Am I not sleeping properly? Am I not eating properly? Am I not being physically active? What are my early warning signs? Some of you have already told me a few weeks ago. Analyze the source of your anger. Step back and say, why did that make me angry? What about this situation is causing me to be angry? Break the cycle of anger, aggressive behavior, right? When we know that we're going back into a pattern, is it something that I do every day? Is it something that I do every time this happens? So what is it about this situation? Take a time out, step back, think about it. Catch your thinking errors. Is this a negative thought or positive thought? Why did I go straight to the negative thought? Am I having a thinking error? Am I magnifying this issue? View the anger generating situation as a problem that needs to be solved. Remember, that was the thing we said in the first week, an anger moment. I'm angry because anger shows you that there's a problem that we need to solve, whether that be, I need to be angry because I'm actually physically being attacked, or angry because I'm perceiving or believing, or one of my beliefs are being challenged. What do I need to fix? How can I solve this problem? Maybe I need to have a desk conversation. Mentally and behaviorally rehearse handling the difficult situation. Just like with the desk script, I always say it's better to write something down so that you know what you're going to be saying. So we'll brainstorm some coping strategies. Now, what could you do to prevent an anger generating situation? We have talked about that over the last 4 weeks right now. And so if I were to ask you, what are some of the things that you have started doing over the last 4 weeks to prevent an anger generating situation? some of the things maybe that we learned or some of the things that we've gone over. So keep calm and use a coping skill, right? Some of those coping skills we talked about, coping strategies. Recognize and acknowledge that this is an anger generating situation, right? We need to change it. Are you doing any self-care or stress management? Are you doing your deep breathing, or have you done meditation or mindfulness? Are you sleeping or eating well or being active? Are you listening to music, doing yoga, spending time with friends? Remember, we talked about self-care being so essential to managing anger. So essential. And it's not selfish, right? We know that it is selfless. We need to make sure that we are doing some of this stuff for ourselves. Otherwise, our cup will always be full and we'll never be able to put it down. And then anger is going to be at the top of that emotional umbrella. Ask yourself, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely, or are you tired? When do children typically have tantrums? When they're tired or when they're hungry, right? Are you hangry? Do you feel like you have no support? That's what the lonely is. Do you feel like you have no resources or no one to talk to? Because that could feel lonely. Or are you already angry about something? That's what halt is. Okay? I often ask myself that. Manage your perceptions. What story am I telling myself? How am I seeing the situation? Why am I angry about the plate? Why am I angry about the blue shirt? Why am I angry about this phone call? Why am I angry? What story am I telling myself? Right? Remember the first guy from the first week, he always used to say, they're doing it on purpose to piss me off. Well, no, they're not, because they really don't know who you are. Even if, you know, they're in a lineup in front of you, if they're in traffic, if they're at the gym, they really don't know you. They don't care about you. They're really thinking about themselves. It's really not. They're trying to piss you off. That's the story you're telling yourself, and that's what's making you angry. So knowing to remember to think about, what is it about the situation? What are my coping thoughts? Have you thought of any coping thoughts so far? Are you using any coping thoughts? Are you thinking about your personal power grid? What can I do to change this situation? And what can I let go of that I cannot change? Remember, those are the two places that we need to be. What can I control? And what do I have to let go of that's not going to change? What are avoidance or escape strategies can I use until I solve this issue? Remembering that those are not permanent solutions, but can be, right? When we think about, yes. Oh, interesting, right? Very interesting that cannabis was a coping strategy, but because you were lonely. That's very interesting. And that's really important to know that about yourself, because we have to start being more aware of the patterns that we've gotten ourselves into, and the fact that you know that, that's really important. Having a connection or a support network is one of the most important things that we can do, someone to talk to. So that's really great. And then, how's your lifestyle? Have you been doing everything that you can to make sure that you are healthy and well? Right? How's your sleeping, eating, and physical activity? So we know that those are the three major things to start with. So making sure that you start with those if you're not doing those three properly. So in summary, we talked about the definition of anger. Anger and stress and mental health are linked, right? The more stress we have, the less that we take care of our stress, the more we hold on to anger. Remembering our trigger thoughts and coping thoughts. And our trigger thoughts are all of those negative, the negative story we're telling ourselves, and all of the coping thoughts will reduce the anger. Maybe they didn't hear me. Maybe they have different priorities. Maybe they didn't hear me properly or correctly. Maybe they don't know what I need. We talked about forgiveness, right? And letting go of some of the things that are no longer serving us. We talked about lapse and relapse and preventing relapse and using our coping strategies. And I would like you, if you can, to throw something in the chat of What's your takeaway of this class? What are some of the coping strategies that you have started using or that you will start using based on some of the things that you've learned so far? Because it feels like this session went by really fast. So it's, I think what's really important is that you use one thing, self-care, taking time breaks, good. Those are really important. Pause and take a deep breath immediately upon feeling triggered, right? To not have to have that anger moment, right? It's not worth it for you. So taking that time, taking a break, pause, take a deep breath, whatever that might be. And I like that self-care. That's so important and something that we often don't take seriously. So closure, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. And I really want you to remember that. If something's not working for you, ask yourself, how or why are you seeing it a certain way? Can we change it? What can you do to change your thought or your feelings about this? Why is it making you angry? Right? We talked about that, that cycle. Every thought is going to lead to an emotion. So why are you having this emotion? What thought are you having? And to stop and think about that thought is not as easy as we might think, but so important. So remembering your resources, knowing that you can call them at any time. A lot of these are 24/7. Knowing that if you need to even help somebody else, you can call these places and ask them how to help somebody else. And I will be sending these resources in your email later today or tomorrow. Excuse me. And if you need to contact us, you're welcome to email us. You're welcome to follow us on Facebook or Instagram and check out our website. So that is the end of today. That's the end of our 4 weeks. Sorry. Excuse me. That's the end of our 4 weeks. I'm just going to stop the recording.